Hi everyone, I'm Francesca with the Idaho STEM Action Center. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at the second piece of our three-legged stool for learning design, resources and constraints. Part 1, Learn. Figuring out the resources you need is an important part of any planning process, but we tend to take resources into consideration only after we've decided what we want to do. The problem with this approach is that educators face major limitations on time, money, materials, and technical expertise. You might come across a great activity on the internet that aligns with what you want to teach, only to realize it just isn't feasible in your learning environment. At the same time, in this age of unlimited information, sorting through activities until you find one that works can be simply overwhelming. Gathering information about your resources and constraints ahead of time can help you to both narrow your focus and avoid wasting valuable time on an unrealistic concept. This approach might sound familiar if you've ever used the engineering design process with your students. In the engineering design process, or EDP, identifying constraints alongside your criteria for success is the step that comes right before brainstorming. In fact, educators who use the EDP often intentionally introduce constraints to stimulate students' creativity. This is because constraints have a way of encouraging us to think outside the box, generating new and more varied solutions than we would under regular circumstances. You can use this concept to your advantage when designing learning activities too. Rather than identifying a specific activity you want to do and then determining the resources you'll need, you can start by identifying the resources you know you have and using that to inform your brainstorming process, alongside the other elements of learning design. For example, let's say you want to do an activity with your students on bridges. If you know ahead of time that all you have for resources are some basic classroom supplies and a pile of cardboard in your garage, you can focus your research and thinking on activities that specifically make use of cardboard. This should result in a brainstorming process that is more creative, more efficient, and ultimately more satisfying than simply searching the internet until you find a bridge activity that works. Even so, while brainstorming within constraints may yield better results, it doesn't mean that it isn't still challenging. Let's head over to the planning studio where we'll introduce strategies to help you think more creatively about the resources you do have. Part 2, Plan. Brainstorming within constraints is celebrated for sparking creativity, but what happens when the additional criteria makes you feel just as stuck? If you find yourself in this situation, here are 5 strategies you can use to help you get started. Number 1, consider how you might use materials in novel ways. Use markers, index cards, or even students themselves as manipulatives for demonstrating math concepts. Or consider how you might build a pulley out of a jump rope and a broom. You can also build creative use of materials into the activity itself. For example, you could challenge your learners to build the biggest circuit they can using conductive objects instead of wires. Not only does this limit your material requirements to just a handful of batteries and LEDs, it's also an excellent opportunity to build your learners' problem-solving skills and deepen their understanding of science concepts. This strategy can also look like finding an everyday alternative for an item you don't have the budget for. For example, in the activity I introduced in segment 1.1, my learners built cotton ball launchers out of toilet paper tubes. The original design called for a wooden dowel to use for the handle, but I replaced it with something I already have a lot of, pencils. The second strategy is to identify possible untapped resources in your community or on the internet, and to consider how you might integrate them into an upcoming lesson or program. Free cloud-based software can offer your students experience in a variety of creative STEM fields, including coding, 3D modeling, GIS mapping, and more. Local businesses and organizations may provide outreach programs or curriculum related to their fields. Individuals, including family members of your own students, can also provide expertise or material resources, so don't be afraid to reach out and see what your community has to offer. A third strategy is to find opportunities to use recycled and natural materials in your activities, like the toilet paper tubes I used in my activity from 1.1. Not only is this a more sustainable and low-cost way to do activities in your space, it can also help change the way your learners view the world around them, helping them to recognize opportunities they couldn't see before. With cost out of the way, one of the most significant barriers to using these types of materials is not having them on hand when you need them. You can set yourself up for success by creating a system to gather and store these types of materials ahead of time. Post flyers or send a note home with your students asking for donations of materials like cardboard tubes, plastic bottles, and tin cans. Gather natural items on daily walks or at recess. Whatever your method, stockpiling these items ahead of time will save you stress when it comes time to plan a new activity. In the face of serious material limitations, our fourth strategy takes advantage of a different kind of resource, space. Even if you're using simple supplies, incorporating space and movement into your activity will engage your learners in new ways. Rather than making graphs or charts on individual worksheets, make them life-sized using pieces of construction paper taped to the wall. Play movement games to model scientific concepts, such as the space between molecules in different states of matter or the distance between planets in the solar system. Scaling up in this way can make activities more engaging without adding material cost. This is a strategy I also used in my activity from 1.1 by having students measure long distances that kept them physically as well as mentally engaged. The last strategy addresses constraints on personnel. Since you can't be in several places at once, encourage a culture of peer-to-peer learning by pairing students up and validating their abilities to help each other solve problems. This can be especially helpful in mixed-age spaces where younger participants can learn from older participants. It's a strategy I often use in the space I described in segment 1.1. Ultimately, your own experience and expertise as an educator will shape your brainstorming process, but the strategies we've shared in this video are a great place to start if you're feeling stuck developing hands-on activities with limited resources. Thinking critically about how you're going to use the resources available to you will help you both save time and make activities more engaging for your students. If you'd like to see how this approach works alongside other aspects of creating a learning activity, check out the first video in our series on the three-legged stool for learning design. For even more videos and other great STEM content, hit the button to subscribe or visit resources.stem.idaho.gov. This video was brought to you by the Idaho STEM Action Center. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.